What if I told you that one of the most misunderstood women in history, someone rejected, judged, and labeled by her community, ended up walking beside Jesus Christ himself? Would you believe me if I said this same woman, once seen as an outcast, would later be the first person to witness the resurrection of the Son of God? Right now, you're about to discover the untold truth, the emotional journey, and the powerful transformation of a woman whose name has echoed through centuries, but whose real story has often been lost in whispers and shadows. This isn't just another Bible story you heard in Sunday school. This is a deep, raw, personal faith journey that still speaks directly to our lives today. And I promise you, what you're about to hear will challenge what you thought you knew about judgment, mercy, and the power of being seen by Jesus. So, stay with me because by the end of this video, you're going to get the answer to the question that probably brought you here. Who really was Mary Magdalene, and why did Jesus choose her? Now, before we dive deep, let me ask you something, and be honest with yourself. Have you ever felt like you didn't belong? Like people looked at you and saw your past instead of your potential? Maybe they whispered about your mistakes or treated you like you were too far gone to be redeemed. If you've ever felt that weight, even for a moment, then Mary's story is your story too. Her pain, her shame, her loneliness, it all speaks to something deeply human. That deep ache for a second chance. A clean slate. To be seen not for what you've done, but for who you truly are beneath the surface. That's why this story matters. Because Mary Magdalene wasn't just a background character in the Bible. She was a woman who broke every expectation, walked away from darkness, and became a devoted follower of Christ when no one believed in her. And you, yes, you watching right now, are about to walk every step of that road with her. See, most people think they know her. Maybe you've heard stories or rumors that she was a prostitute, a sinful woman, or someone hopelessly lost. And sure, some of those labels came from centuries of misunderstanding. But what if I told you that much of what you believe about Mary Magdalene isn't even in the Bible? That over the years, her image was shaped by tradition, but her truth, the one recorded in the Gospels, is far more powerful than any fiction. Because the real Mary wasn't just a woman Jesus forgave, she was someone Jesus called. Someone he trusted, someone he gave purpose to, someone he raised up when everyone else had cast her down. Imagine that, being pulled from the pit of despair and given a front row seat to the greatest story in human history. And here's the thing, it's not just about her. It's about you. About how God sees you. This video isn't just going to tell you Mary Magdalene's story. It's going to help you understand your own. Every moment of rejection she endured, every demon she battled, both literal and internal, every risk she took to stand by Jesus, it all leads to the same truth. No one is too broken to be restored. No one is too far to be found. And when Jesus calls your name, everything changes. That's why you need to stay until the end. Because there's something in this story for you. Maybe it's healing. Maybe it's hope. Maybe it's the realization that you're not as lost as you think you are. But I guarantee this, by the time we reach the end of this story, you'll walk away different. So take a deep breath. Set everything else aside. Because this isn't background noise. This isn't just a Bible history lesson or another top 10 biblical women type of list. This is a human story, a redemption arc, a spiritual transformation that will stir something deep inside you. We're going back, way back, to ancient Magdala, a small fishing town on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. Picture it, dusty streets, the scent of salt in the air, market chatter echoing through narrow alleys. Among the crowd, a woman moves quietly, keeping to the shadows. The stares follow her. The murmurs sting like cuts. She's heard it all. There she goes again, the sinner, the possessed, the disgrace. She says nothing. She's too used to the labels now. She wears them like armor, even though they wound her more than anyone knows. But what they don't see, what we are about to uncover, is the raging battle happening beneath her silence. The war inside her mind, her body, her soul. She is tormented. Scripture tells us plainly, Mary Magdalene had 7 demons cast out of her by Jesus. Not 1, not 2, 7. Imagine the torment, the sleepless nights, The isolation. The sheer agony of being trapped in your own skin, feeling like you're being ripped apart from the inside. Imagine people avoiding you, fearing you, mocking you, not knowing the hell you're living through every day. And then in the middle of that chaos, one man reaches out his hand. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't condemn. He doesn't repeat what others say. He looks straight into her and sees her. Not her shame, not her past, not her possession. Her. The real her. The one who's still alive underneath all the darkness. And in that moment, everything begins to change. But how did she get there? How did a girl from a quiet fishing village fall into such spiritual torment? What happened in her childhood, her family, her town? What did she lose, and what did it cost her? And more importantly, what did she gain when Jesus found her? These are the questions we're going to explore, piece by piece, as we walk through Mary Magdalene's life together. You'll meet the people who judged her. You'll feel the weight of every stare. You'll stand with her in silence as the crowd stones her with words. You'll witness the moment when Jesus steps in and speaks just one word, and everything turns. Stay with me, because there's more. You're going to hear what no one else will tell you. You're going to understand why Mary stayed at the foot of the cross when others ran. Why she waited by the tomb when others hid in fear. Why, on that early Sunday morning, when the stone had been rolled away, it was Mary, not Peter, not John, who stood face to face with the risen Christ. That moment? That's the heartbeat of her story. And if you've ever wondered if God can use someone like you, her life is your answer. We'll talk about how Mary went from the margins of society to the center of the gospel story. How she stepped out of the shadows of shame into the light of divine purpose. We'll explore how her transformation wasn't overnight, but intentional, painful, raw, and deeply beautiful. You'll understand why Mary Magdalene has inspired generations of believers and why her story still challenges us today to look beyond labels and lean into grace. But we're not there yet. We're still standing in the tension, right at the beginning of her journey. She doesn't know what's coming. She hasn't yet met the man who will change her life. She hasn't seen the eyes of love that look past the scars. All she knows right now is the pain, the rejection, the confusion, and something inside her whispers that there must be more than this. That she wasn't born just to be broken. That someone somewhere can see who she really is. And then he arrives. But what happens in their first meeting? What does Jesus say to her? How does she react? Does she fight it? Does she cry? Does she believe it? And how does that single moment reshape the rest of her life and history itself? That's where we're heading next. But for now, we pause here, on the edge of revelation. Because the moment Mary Magdalene's eyes meet Jesus's for the first time is the moment everything changes. And you don't want to miss it. Before that first life-altering glance between Mary Magdalene and Jesus, before her name would echo through churches and Sunday sermons across generations, Mary was simply a woman trying to survive in a world that had long decided her worth, or rather, her lack of it. She wasn't a stranger to whispers. She had become familiar with sideways glances, the ones that followed her through crowded streets or lingered behind her in the marketplace like shadows that refused to fade. People thought they knew who she was. But the truth is, no one really knew anything. Not where she came from, not what she carried, not the storms she weathered in silence. And that's the tragedy, when people stop asking questions about someone and start assuming they have the answers. That's when a person becomes invisible. And that was Mary's world. Loud with judgment, but painfully quiet with understanding. She was from Magdala, a coastal village known for its fishing industry and textile trade. Her family, if they were still around, is barely spoken of in the Gospels, and that silence speaks volumes. Some say she was once wealthy, possibly well-connected. Others claim she had been abused or discarded, left to fend for herself from a young age. The truth is somewhere in the murky in-between, and it's that ambiguity that keeps people guessing. Perhaps she once belonged to a respected household, maybe even one with religious influence. But something happened, something serious enough to shake her entire life off its foundation. Was it betrayal? Loss? Some mistake that spiraled out of control? No one knows for sure, and Mary wasn't telling. Whatever it was, it left a crack wide enough for darkness to seep in. And once it did, it didn't let go. You have to understand, possession in biblical times wasn't just feared, it was condemned. People didn't see it as a medical issue or psychological trauma. It was seen as judgment, proof that the afflicted person had somehow invited evil in. Mary didn't just suffer, she was blamed for suffering. The mention of her being possessed by 7 demons wasn't casual, it was severe. In biblical symbolism, the number 7 often means completeness, totality. In other words, she wasn't just afflicted. She was overwhelmed, completely consumed. But what were those demons really? Were they literal spirits? Or was it a way to describe the crippling depression, anxiety, fear, and trauma that she carried day after day? Was it addiction? Mental torment? Flashbacks of something horrific that had happened to her in secret? No matter the form, one thing was clear. Mary was not herself. Not fully. Not anymore. There were rumors, of course, as there always are in small towns. Some whispered she had been part of an elite circle once. Others claimed she had ties with Roman officials. A few even suggested she had used her beauty to manipulate those in power, and when her charm wore off, they discarded her. Maybe that's where the prostitute rumor was born. Or maybe people simply needed a reason to hate her, and that one was easy to believe. But here's the unsettling part. Every person who spoke about her, judged her, or feared her, did so without ever really knowing her. They didn't see the girl who cried herself to sleep, or the woman who screamed silently in the night, desperate to claw her way out of the prison her life had become. They didn't know about the men who took what they wanted, or the so-called friends who vanished when she needed them most. They only saw the aftermath, the hollow stare, the sudden outbursts, the way she avoided eye contact as if making it would reveal too much. But what if that pain wasn't just random? What if someone wanted her to disappear from respectable society? What if she had crossed the wrong person? There were whispers about an older man, someone with influence, possibly a Pharisee or a wealthy merchant, who had once been close to her family. Some say he took her under his wing when she was vulnerable. Others suggest he exploited her. Could he have been the cause of her downfall? Could he have started the rumors that spread like wildfire through Magdala? And if so, why? To cover his own guilt? To ensure she'd never be believed if she ever spoke up? It's all speculation, of course, but speculation is the currency of towns like Magdala, where stories fill the void left by truth. And in Mary's case, that void was enormous. She had few allies, if any, but one name kept surfacing: Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, a woman of position, wealth, and surprising boldness. Rumor had it that Joanna had met Mary at her lowest and didn't turn away. Some said she tried to help her, gave her food, even a place to sleep. That kind of kindness, especially between women of such drastically different social classes, wasn't just rare, it was dangerous. If Joanna was caught associating with a woman like Mary, her husband's reputation could have crumbled. And yet, the two seemed to cross paths often. Could Joanna have been the one who told Mary about Jesus? Or was she simply drawn to the same light Mary would soon encounter? We don't know. But whatever the truth, their connection wasn't coincidence. It felt like providence. Still, there was something deeper at play here. People began to notice that Mary had started spending time outside of Magdala, long walks to remote hillsides, sitting for hours by the Sea of Galilee, as if searching for something or someone. A man had been traveling through nearby towns, healing the sick, feeding the poor, challenging the corrupt religious elite. They said he spoke like no one else ever had, that his words pierced the soul, that he could see straight into your heart and still choose to love you. Could Mary have heard these rumors and followed them like breadcrumbs leading to hope? Or had she already seen him from afar? Had she watched from the crowd, too afraid to get closer, yet unable to walk away? One day, she vanished for nearly a week. No one knew where she had gone, and when she returned, something was different. Her eyes, haunted and hollow for so long, now flickered with something new. Not quite peace, not yet. But focus. Intention. And then came the moment no one could explain. Mary was seen walking beside Jesus of Nazareth, not hiding in the shadows, not trembling behind the crowd. She was standing with him, listening. People said he had touched her head and whispered something no one could hear. And in that instant, just like that, the madness was gone. The shaking stopped. Her silence was replaced by stillness. The storm inside her settled like a sea after a violent squall. No one could explain it. And yet there she was,
whole, free.
But what if the demons hadn't left on their own? What if there were forces that didn't want her healed, that wanted her past to cling to her like chains? Because just as Jesus had freed her, others were now watching. And not everyone was pleased. Certain Pharisees who had known about Mary's past weren't thrilled to see her walking among the followers of this new teacher. They began to whisper that her presence discredited him, that no holy man would associate with a woman like her. And others, some former friends from Magdalene, started resurfacing, suddenly interested in her well-being, asking strange questions, trying to dig into where she'd been and who she'd spoken to. It was as if someone, somewhere, didn't want Mary Magdalene to be redeemed, as if her healing threatened something deeper, some secret, still hidden beneath layers of silence and shame. And just when it seemed Mary might finally find peace, one name surfaced again, the older man from her past. But this time, he wasn't lurking in the shadows. He was stepping forward, publicly criticizing Jesus, claiming he was a fraud, that his miracles were staged, and his followers deceived. The tension was building. Lines were being drawn. And Mary was right in the center of it all. Was he trying to silence her? Was there something she knew that could ruin him? Or had he simply grown afraid that the girl he'd once buried in shame had returned with fire in her eyes and truth on her tongue? Mary's story was no longer just about healing. It was about danger, about exposure, and perhaps about revenge. Because sometimes the people who fear the truth the most are the ones who once tried to bury it. And now, the question burns hotter than ever. What really happened to Mary Magdalene before she met Jesus? Who was trying to keep her quiet, and why? That answer lies just ahead, but the truth, when it's finally revealed, will shake everything you thought you knew. Stay with me. The most shocking part is still to come. Just when Mary Magdalene began to feel the ground steady beneath her feet, as though life was finally offering her a place to stand, something strange happened, something that stirred the dust of her past back into the air. One morning, not long after a long walk with the disciples along the road to Capernaum, Mary returned to the camp to find her small satchel open, her few belongings scattered. At first, she thought maybe it had just tipped over, perhaps a gust of wind or a curious child looking for food. But the closer she looked, the more her heart began to sink. A folded cloth that had belonged to her mother, a single keepsake from the life she had before everything unraveled, was gone. And along with it, a small piece of parchment she had hidden inside, something she had never shared with anyone. It wasn't much, a few lines written in trembling ink, perhaps part of a letter or a forgotten journal. But to Mary, it meant everything. It held clues, hints, fragments of something that didn't make sense yet, but that she'd been holding on to for years. And now it was gone. She tried not to panic. People misplace things. The desert winds are unpredictable. But deep down, she knew this wasn't chance. This was calculated. And the worst part? No one else seemed to understand why it mattered. When she quietly asked Peter if he'd seen anyone near her belongings, he waved it off with a distracted shrug. "We're among friends," he said. "You're safe now." But that was the problem. Mary didn't feel safe. Not anymore. She had fought too hard to silence the voices inside her, those dark, slithering memories that still whispered to her in moments of weakness. And now that she had finally begun to breathe again, someone was trying to pull her back under. That night, Mary sat alone by the fire, staring into the flames. That piece of parchment had come from her time in Magdala, from the days when she still remembered faces she now tried to forget. It had been given to her by someone she once trusted, a servant girl who worked in the home of that older man, the one who had vanished from her life without explanation. The girl had warned her, long ago, that not everything in that house was as it seemed. that secrets were kept behind locked doors, that names were written down in hidden ledgers. Mary hadn't understood it all back then, but in the years since, pieces began to click together. There had been something deeper at play. A lie. A cover-up. And now, someone had stolen the only physical trace she had left of that secret. It didn't help that strange things had started happening around the group. One morning, a message arrived from a town Jesus hadn't yet visited, a cryptic note warning him not to come. No name, no signature. Just the words, "Some wounds don't want to heal." The disciples argued over its meaning, some thinking it was just another veiled threat from the Pharisees. But Mary knew better. She felt it. That note wasn't for Jesus. It was for her. It was a warning. Someone from her past knew where she was, who she was with. And they weren't done with her yet. Then came Thomas. He had always been kind to Mary, quiet but observant, always watching from the edges. He asked questions no one else dared to ask. At first, she appreciated his curiosity. But lately, something about his questions had shifted. They were too specific. He asked about her time in Magdala, about who she knew there, what she remembered. When she tried to brush it off, he leaned in closer. "You've been quiet about your past," he said. "You should talk to someone. Secrets don't heal, they rot." His words weren't unkind, but there was a sharpness underneath, a tension she couldn't name. And when she looked into his eyes, she saw something flicker. Not malice, but maybe motive. Could Thomas be connected to the man from her past? Was he sent to watch her? Or was he just another lost soul trying to make sense of things like everyone else? Mary didn't know, and that was the worst part. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to trust all of them. But the voice in her mind, the one she had learned to listen to after everything else had failed her, was whispering again. Be careful. Not everyone who follows the light walks without shadow. Then, as if fate had a cruel sense of timing, something else surfaced. A woman arrived in the village claiming to know Mary from years before. She was older now, her voice weathered, but her eyes still sharp as a blade. She said she had worked as a scribe's assistant in Magdala and remembered seeing Mary visit the estate of the man in question. She said she knew what had happened behind those stone walls, that people had been paid to forget, that documents had been burned, that one night a girl had screamed and no one came to help. But when Mary pressed her for more, the woman grew silent, eyes darting around the camp. "I've said too much," she whispered. "He's still watching. Even now." Mary tried to follow her after she left, but by morning, the woman was gone. No one had seen her leave. No one could even confirm she had been there. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, just like the parchment, just like the truth Mary had been chasing for so long. And now, more questions hung in the air than answers. Who was really behind her torment? What exactly had been done to her all those years ago? And why, even after all this time, was someone so desperate to make sure she never found out? Just when Mary thought the shadows of her past were behind her, it became terrifyingly clear they had only been waiting for the right moment to return. And now that she was stronger, now that she had a voice, they were ready to silence her again. But the next move would not be theirs. Because in the days ahead, Mary would discover something that changes everything. A detail, so small it had been overlooked. A name scribbled where it shouldn't have been. A secret alliance formed in darkness. And when she finally sees the full picture, she will realize the betrayal didn't come from an enemy. It came from someone she trusted. Someone still standing beside her. And, the worst part? She still doesn't know who it is. Not why it was just after dusk, the sky washed in that deep, bruised purple that always came before nightfall, when Joanna arrived at the edge of the encampment with her hands trembling and a message clenched tightly in her grip. No one saw her come in, not at first, but Mary did. She always noticed the ones who moved like shadows. Joanna's face, usually so poised and measured, was pale beneath the flickering firelight, her eyes darting between faces as if she expected to be followed. Mary stood, her heart already pounding with that quiet, unmistakable sense that something had just shifted. Joanna didn't speak at first. She only reached out, opened her hand, and revealed the parchment. It was nearly identical to the one Mary had seen earlier, except this one had her name on it. And it wasn't a warning. It was a threat. If she speaks, you both burn. Mary's stomach dropped. The handwriting was similar, but the ink was darker, smeared as if written in haste. Joanna swallowed hard, whispering that it had been left at her home in the dead of night, tucked into her son's blanket. Whoever was behind it wasn't just targeting Mary anymore. They were sending a message to anyone who dared to stand with her. Joanna, for all her status and privilege, had crossed a line by being loyal to someone the world had discarded. And now she was paying the price. She told Mary that the night before the message arrived, she had received an unexpected visitor, a man dressed as a merchant, asking odd questions about Jesus' followers, particularly the women. He hadn't stayed long, but something in his voice, something too polished, too rehearsed, felt wrong. Joanna hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it was clear. Someone was watching them both. What made it worse was what Joanna had found inside her home later that same evening, an old coin, tucked beneath a stack of folded linen. It was tarnished, foreign, nothing she recognized. But Mary did. She had seen a coin just like it years ago, in the hands of a man from Damascus who used to do business with the elites in Magdala. He was known for brokering silence, for arranging disappearances without leaving a trail. If one of his coins was showing up now, it meant someone had paid him again. Which meant this wasn't just about secrets anymore. This was about control. Mary's thoughts raced. Every time she got closer to the truth, something or someone stepped in to scatter the pieces. And now there was this added layer, this second thread that wove directly through the life of someone she trusted. Were Joanna's connections putting them all in danger? Or had someone from Joanna's past already betrayed her, dragging Mary into the fallout? The line between ally and threat was blurring fast, and even Mary, who had once trusted her instincts above all, was starting to doubt what she knew. Then came the contradiction that sent everything spiraling. While searching for answers, Peter mentioned something offhandedly, a list he had found tucked in a satchel during one of their stops. It was written in a delicate, practiced hand and listed names, followers of Jesus, supporters, women included. Mary's name was on it. So was Joanna's. But so was another name no one expected, Susanna. A quiet woman, deeply spiritual, always soft-spoken and generous. She had been with them since the early days, often helping distribute food and care for the sick. But now, her name was tied to this list that looked less like a roster of support and more like a record. An inventory. Mary felt her skin prickle. Why would someone keep such a list unless they were watching from the inside? Unless one of them wasn't who they said they were? When Mary confronted Susanna gently, the woman didn't deny knowing about the list, but claimed it was given to her by someone in the city, a man who said he worked with Nicodemus. He had claimed it was a protective measure, something to keep track of those close to Jesus in case they needed to flee. But Mary couldn't help but notice how Susanna's story shifted slightly each time she told it, how her hands fidgeted when Mary asked if she had shown the list to anyone else. And that's when the final twist of the night hit Mary, like a punch to the chest. Susanna revealed that someone else had asked her for the list just a few days earlier. Thomas. Now Mary's mind was in overdrive. Was Thomas working with someone in the city? Was he the one passing information under the guise of curiosity? Or had Susanna twisted the truth to push blame elsewhere? The most terrifying part wasn't even the idea that one of them could be lying. It was the realization that both of them could be. And if that were true, it meant the betrayal wasn't just coming. It was already here, living among them, cloaked in smiles and scripture. As Mary tried to piece the threads together, she remembered something else. A phrase the older woman had said before vanishing. He's still watching. Even now. At the time, Mary had assumed she meant the man from her past. But what if she didn't? What if he wasn't someone long gone, but someone still walking beside them every day? Watching, waiting, pulling strings in silence while wearing the face of a friend? The fire burned low that night, casting long shadows across the ground. Mary sat quietly, listening to the distant wind howl like a warning through the trees. Her thoughts were spinning, her heart pounding with the weight of too many questions and not enough answers. She had thought the worst of her journey was behind her. That healing meant peace. That freedom meant safety. But now, with every passing moment, it became more clear what was coming next would test everything she had come to believe. Because in the search for truth, not all roads lead to freedom. Some lead right back into the storm. And somewhere, hidden just beyond the reach of the firelight, someone was watching, waiting for her next move. The air felt different that morning, heavier, still, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Mary awoke before sunrise, long before the camp stirred, gripped by a nameless unease that she couldn't shake. She had dreamt of shadows again, thick and creeping like smoke, whispering her name from corners that didn't exist. It wasn't the first time. Lately, her sleep had been fractured, haunted by memories that weren't fully memories, images that flickered and vanished before she could hold on to them. A man's voice speaking her name in a tone too calm to be innocent. A locked door. A silver ring. None of it made sense yet, but her body remembered. And now, waking with the sweat of fear still cold on her neck, she felt that something real, was coming. She moved quietly through the camp, her bare feet crunching softly against the dirt as she scanned the horizon. At first, nothing seemed out of place. But then, just as the first glimmer of sun broke the night's hold, she saw it. Footprints. Not the kind left by someone casually walking. These were deeper, staggered, looping around her sleeping area in wide circles. Someone had been watching her while she slept. Her breath hitched. She crouched and studied the tracks, noting the odd spacing, as though the person had paused often. Not a wild animal. Not a friend. Someone had crept close, too close, and stayed just long enough to leave a message without words. Panic pulsed at the edge of her vision. She thought of Joanna and the message left near her son. She thought of the stolen parchment, the stranger in town, the list of names. None of it was disconnected. Each piece was part of a puzzle that now surrounded her. She looked up quickly, scanning the line of trees that border the encampment. And that's when she saw it. Just for a second, a figure, dressed in dark cloth, standing still between two olive trees, watching her. But before she could move, they were gone, vanished into the foliage like a ghost swallowed by the morning fog. Mary didn't tell the others right away. She needed to be sure. But her thoughts spiraled as the day wore on, and when night came again, her mind was louder than ever. Every sound in the darkness felt like a footstep. Every snap of a twig made her jump. She clutched her satchel close, not because it had anything valuable in it anymore, but because it was the only thing left that felt like hers. That night, the fire did little to warm her. Her thoughts drifted back to Magdala, to the cold stone floors, the silent screams, the night she ran and didn't look back. What if this wasn't just someone trying to scare her? What if this was about making her disappear all over again? The next morning brought no relief, only dread. When the sun rose, one of the disciples, Nathaniel, was missing. At first, the others assumed he had simply gone ahead to secure lodging in the next town. But as the hours passed, his absence grew more troubling. His things were still at the camp. His sandals, his staff. No one had seen him leave, and no message had been left behind. It wasn't like him. He was dependable, meticulous, someone who never strayed without a word. Mary felt the blood drain from her face when she realized Nathaniel had been the one who found the second message with Joanna. He had been the first to suggest that Mary's past might be tied to a greater conspiracy. He had been asking questions. And now he was gone. Mary tried to stay calm, but the silence around his disappearance was suffocating. No tracks. No clues. Just a void. And with that void came the sharp edge of paranoia, slicing through every interaction. She began to question everyone's glances, everyone's tone. When Thomas spoke too kindly, she wondered what he wasn't saying. When Susanna offered her food, she hesitated before taking it. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had Nathaniel found something? Had he told someone? Had he been silenced before he could share it? That afternoon, as she sat beneath a fig tree trying to steady her shaking hands, an older woman from a nearby village approached her. She didn't speak at first, just placed a rolled cloth on the ground beside Mary and turned to leave. Mary called after her, but the woman kept walking, vanishing into the bustling crowd with frightening ease. With trembling fingers, Mary unwrapped the cloth. Inside was the silver ring. She recognized it instantly. It had belonged to him, the man from her past, the one who had controlled her life in Magdala. She had seen it on his finger every day, a mark of his power. Its presence now, in this moment, was not coincidence. It was a message. But the deeper terror was not just that the ring had found its way to her. It was the fact that the ring was clean, polished, and warm. Someone had been wearing it. Tears burned her eyes, not just from fear, but from exhaustion, the kind of emotional fatigue that comes when you realize you've never truly escaped. That no matter how far you run, some chains don't break. They only hide under your skin. She didn't know who to trust. Every face in the camp now held questions. Had the ring been planted by someone close to her? Was someone trying to unhinge her piece by piece, make her doubt her sanity so she'd stay silent? And the most terrifying thought, the one that made her stomach twist, was this. What if the man from her past wasn't sending someone? What if he had come himself? Mary looked around, her heart pounding. The others laughed nearby, unaware that one of them might be the reason Nathaniel was gone. That one of them had slipped the ring into her hands like a death sentence wrapped in silk. Every step she took now felt like a gamble. Every conversation a test. She didn't know when the strike would come, or from whom, but the storm was building fast, and she could feel it closing in. Somewhere, buried in the smoke of fear and uncertainty, was the truth she needed to survive. But the closer she got, the more dangerous it became. And what she would uncover next would shake the ground beneath all of them. Mary's hands trembled as she stared at the silver ring, its cold shine reflecting the flickering torchlight from the nearby fire. She had wrapped it again and hidden it beneath the folds of her tunic, hoping no one would notice the way her body seemed to tense with every sound. For hours after the woman delivered it, Mary had replayed every encounter, every whispered conversation, every moment she had let herself believe she was finally free from the past that stalked her like a hungry wolf. But deep in her chest, something was shifting. She could feel it, like a thread that had finally begun to unravel after being stretched too thin. And as darkness fell again over the hills, that unraveling became undeniable. It started with Peter. He approached Mary just before nightfall, his expression grim, his shoulders stiff with unease. She expected him to speak about Nathaniel, maybe offer some comfort or hint at what the others were thinking. But instead, he reached into his cloak and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, another parchment. He said he had found it earlier that morning wedged between two stones near the riverbank, half-soaked, nearly unreadable. He hadn't wanted to panic the others, so he kept it quiet. But what he read changed everything. The message was simple but devastating. The outcast walks among deceivers. But it is not her past that will destroy her. It is her faith in the wrong one. At first, Mary thought it was another threat, another attempt to shake her sense of safety. But Peter's next words shattered her entirely. He told her that the handwriting matched an old record kept by the temple scribes, something he'd seen years ago when he still worked closely with the priests. It was a handwriting style used by the temple's secret keepers, those who recorded information deemed too dangerous for public eyes. That style was used for internal alerts, coded messages, and lists. The kind of lists Mary had just discovered included her name. But here was the twist. The parchment Peter held did not come from the temple directly. It had been intercepted months ago by someone close to them. Someone who had known this warning existed and had said nothing. Mary's heart raced as Peter whispered the name, Joanna. Mary staggered back, the ground seeming to tilt beneath her. It didn't make sense. Joanna had been the one who warned her. She had shown the threatening note. She had confided in her. They had wept together over memories too heavy to carry alone. But Peter's voice stayed calm, focused, as he explained that Joanna had once worked not just within Herod's court, but also alongside temple scribes during her early days as a court informant. Before she followed Jesus, her life had revolved around secrets, exchanges, whispered trades of information between powerful men. She had been trained to see everything, say nothing, and ensure no one knew who she truly served. Peter told Mary that after Joanna received her threat, she had disappeared for nearly 2 hours. When asked about it later, she claimed she had gone to pray alone. But Peter had found fresh tracks in the opposite direction, toward the town square, where messengers and merchants passed through. And now the timeline didn't fit. The coin Mary had seen before, the one from Damascus, was known to be used by temple sympathizers to track defectors. The fact that it had ended up in Joanna's home couldn't be dismissed as coincidence anymore. Mary didn't want to believe it. She couldn't. Joanna had stood by her when others questioned her presence. She had comforted her in the dark, laughed with her in fleeting moments of peace. But now, every shared glance felt like a mask. Every kind word sounded rehearsed. Mary felt something tear inside her, not just fear, but betrayal. It was the kind of pain that stripped trust away in one ruthless sweep. And then, just as Mary was about to confront her, another blow fell. Susanna came rushing into camp with her shawl torn and her breath short, her eyes wild with something deeper than fear. She said she had gone to the edge of the woods to gather water and stumbled upon a man, weak, half-conscious, bleeding from the head. It was Nathaniel. He was alive, but he had been tied, gagged, and left hidden in the hollow of a tree like someone meant for him to disappear without a trace. He couldn't speak at first, his mouth too dry, his mind too dazed, but he had whispered one name before collapsing again. Not Joanna. Thomas. Mary's stomach twisted in confusion. Just hours ago, she had started to believe Joanna had orchestrated everything. But now Thomas, sweet, clever, skeptical Thomas, was being named by the man who had vanished. And the worst part? Thomas was gone. He hadn't been seen since the night before. No one thought to ask where he had gone. No one questioned it, until now.
That's when it hit Mary.
What if they were both involved? What if this wasn't just one traitor, but two? Each moving pieces on their own board, each manipulating the others for different reasons. Maybe Joanna had ties to the temple. Maybe Thomas was working with someone else entirely, someone who didn't want the truth about Mary's past or her connection to Jesus to come to light. The threads that had once felt tangled were now in full-blown knots, pulling tighter with every revelation. Mary realized the game had been bigger than her from the very start. She had been a piece, not a player, moved, watched, used. But no more. Her eyes burned with something sharper than fear now. She wasn't going to run. She was going to dig, expose, and uncover whatever truth they were all trying to bury. And yet, somewhere in the shadows of her mind, one question echoed louder than the rest. What if the real enemy wasn't Thomas or Joanna? What if it was someone even closer? Someone whose betrayal hadn't been uncovered yet, because it was wrapped in love, loyalty, and the face of salvation itself. The wind picked up again as night swallowed the camp whole, carrying with it a chill that whispered of storms yet to come. Mary sat alone beneath the olive tree, her back pressed against the rough bark as the night thickened around her, pressing down like a weight she couldn't lift. The campfire crackled faintly in the distance, but its warmth felt a lifetime away. Her thoughts swirled like storm clouds, churning with questions, doubt, and a cold realization that she couldn't ignore any longer. She was out of time. Nathaniel remained unconscious. Joanna wouldn't meet her eyes, and Thomas, the one who had once made her laugh on long journeys with his dry wit and sharp observations, had vanished like smoke. And now others were starting to whisper. Every sideways glance felt like a silent accusation. Every shared look between disciples carried layers she could no longer decipher. The fragile trust that once held their group together was unraveling, and Mary stood at the center, unsure if she was being hunted, framed, or simply broken. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat watch with her cloak wrapped tightly around her, eyes scanning the dark, heart racing with every snap of a twig or rustle of wind. At some point, long after most had gone to sleep, Joanna finally approached her. She didn't say a word at first, just sat down beside her, her hands shaking slightly, her eyes haunted by something Mary couldn't yet name. After a long silence, Joanna spoke, low, measured, and full of a sorrow that made Mary's stomach twist. She admitted that she had once served as a messenger between Herod's court and the temple, that she had helped gather intelligence on religious dissidents, even those who would later become followers of Jesus. Her job had been survival. It was either cooperate or be crushed. But she swore she never passed Mary's name along, that she left that world behind the day she encountered Jesus and his teachings. Mary wanted to believe her.
Desperately.
But trust was no longer a currency she could afford to spend. And just as she opened her mouth to ask about the note, the handwriting, the ring, all the warnings, Joanna leaned closer and said something that made the blood drain from Mary's face. "You're not the only one they marked, Mary. But you're the only one they fear." That one sentence changed everything. Suddenly, it wasn't just about her past. It was about her role in something larger, something that threatened those in power in ways she couldn't yet understand. The next day brought an ultimatum. While most were still sleeping, a small group of followers, led by a man named Levi, someone who had once offered Mary bread in the desert, approached her with a tone that carried more command than concern. They had found Thomas's cloak buried near the edge of camp, blood on it, a small vial of poison tucked inside, and beside it another note. This one, unlike the others, mentioned Mary by name. It said she was the key, that everything hinged on keeping her away from Jesus, away from the movement, that if she remained, the entire mission could collapse from within. Levi gave her two choices: leave quietly before sunrise or face open questioning in front of the group. A tribunal, he called it, a public sorting of truth and lies. He said they had to protect the others from potential danger, that if Mary truly had nothing to hide, she should leave for her safety until the truth could be uncovered. But Mary knew what he meant. If she left, she'd be isolated, vulnerable, and very likely eliminated without witness. And if she stayed, she'd be put on trial by people who had already started to fear her. It wasn't just an impossible choice. It was a trap. Her mind flashed through the faces of everyone she had come to know. Nathaniel, still unconscious. Peter, whose warnings now echoed in her skull. Joanna, possibly torn between past and present loyalties. And Jesus, away in another village, unaware of the chaos erupting within the group that followed him. Mary realized the window to act was closing fast. The danger wasn't only from the shadows. It was now sitting by the fire, drinking from shared cups, pretending loyalty while feeding lies. But the worst blow came hours later, when a young girl, no older than 15 and barely old enough to travel alone, arrived at camp. She was dusty, thin, and her voice trembled as she asked for Mary by name. She handed her a piece of folded cloth stained with dirt and sweat. Inside it was a charcoal sketch, a likeness of Mary. Beneath it, in scribbled Hebrew, were the words, "Return what was taken or more will vanish." Mary dropped to her knees, the image slipping from her hands. That sketch wasn't old. It was recent. Someone had drawn her with the robes she wore only 2 days ago. Whoever sent it had seen her, had been close enough to study her face. And now others, innocent others, were being dragged into this web of threats and secrets. This wasn't just about her anymore. The threat had grown larger, more calculated, and more personal. As dusk painted the sky in streaks of gold and ash, Mary stood on the edge of the camp, heart pounding, caught between running toward the unknown or staying to fight for the truth. But as the wind shifted and she caught the scent of smoke, burning parchment, smoldering cloth, she turned to find her satchel had been set ablaze. Her few belongings destroyed. Her map, her journal, her memories gone. Someone was erasing her. She looked up slowly, scanning the camp, her eyes locking onto every face. Someone among them wanted her gone. But what they didn't know, what they had never understood, was that Mary Magdalene had lived through worse. She had been cast out, shamed, broken. But now, for the first time in her life, she wasn't running. Because the truth wasn't buried in the shadows anymore. It was standing just a few feet away. And before this was over, she would force it into the light. No matter what it cost. The wind whipped through the trees as Mary stood frozen, her breath shallow, her heart pounding against her ribs like a war drum. Smoke still curled in the air behind her, the last remnants of her belongings now reduced to ashes. But it wasn't the loss of material things that stunned her, it was what had replaced them. Scrawled in the dirt where her satchel once lay, in thick, deliberate strokes, was a symbol she hadn't seen in years. It was crude but unmistakable. A serpent curled around a chalice. It was the sign of the ones who watched, the secret arm of the temple, created to infiltrate dissident groups, expose defectors, and dismantle influence from within. Mary had heard rumors of them while living in the darker corners of Magdala, when men whispered over cups of bitter wine about those who vanished after speaking too boldly or aligning too closely with reformers.
She thought it was just myth.
Now she knew it was very real. The presence of that symbol changed everything. It meant this wasn't just about her past, or a few wayward enemies seeking revenge. This was an orchestrated operation. A network. A conspiracy buried so deep it had grown roots inside the very movement she believed in. Her body trembled with rage and dread, because that mark wasn't just a threat, it was a message. They were already here. Among them. Pulling strings. Mary ran. Not away, but toward the camp center, where the others had started to gather. Something inside her had cracked open, and what spilled out wasn't fear anymore. It was fire. She needed answers, and she wasn't leaving until she got them. But just as she reached the edge of the clearing, she stopped cold. Peter stood at the center, holding another parchment in his hands, his face pale and drawn. The group was silent, eyes shifting between Peter and the note, like a wave of tension crashing without sound. Mary pushed through, heart racing, until she could see the words. It was another list. Names.
Dates.
Locations. And at the bottom, circled in thick charcoal, hers. But she wasn't the only one. Joanna's name was there. So was Thomas. And two others who had traveled with them for months, Mara and Silas. People she had trusted. People she had shared food with, stories with, prayers with. But that wasn't the worst part. Written beside their names were roles. Titles. Observer. Whisper. Runner. Judge. And next to Mary's, one word. Trigger. Her knees nearly buckled. It wasn't just that she'd been targeted.
She had been used.
Played like a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was a part of. Her presence among the followers had never just been about redemption or forgiveness. She was part of a larger plan, someone who would either tip the movement into chaos or be eliminated to preserve it. And the people she trusted to walk with her in faith had been planted like seeds long before she even arrived. The realization hit her like a wave. Joanna hadn't just been caught in the middle, she had been assigned to watch her. Thomas hadn't disappeared randomly, he had gone to deliver a report. Mara and Silas weren't just quiet followers, they were surveillance. Every moment of comfort, every conversation, every silent prayer had been recorded, analyzed, turned into data for those who feared the power of what Mary might become. But there was more. Peter looked at her then, not with anger, not with fear, but with something else.
Guilt.
And that's when she saw it. He wasn't surprised by the note. He had known. Maybe not the full scope, but enough. Enough to know there were traitors in their midst. Enough to suspect Mary was a target. And he had said nothing. Had watched her spiral under suspicion, let her sleep beside people plotting her downfall, allowed her belongings to be burned, her trust to be shattered, because he didn't know who else was involved. Because maybe, deep down, he wondered if she was guilty too. Mary's hands clenched at her sides, her voice caught between a scream and a sob. The group looked to her now, but not with judgment. With confusion.
With dread.
Because the illusion had been shattered. There was no safe space anymore. No clear enemy. No simple redemption story. Before anyone could speak, a shrill whistle pierced the camp, a signal. 3 short bursts. From the ridge above them, figures emerged. Cloaked, fast-moving, silent. They carried no banners, no weapons drawn. But the mark was visible on their sleeves, the serpent and chalice. Mary's body moved before her mind could catch up. She lunged toward the ridge, shouting for the others to scatter, but it was too late. Two of the newcomers had already entered the camp center, and standing between them, calm, focused, and holding a sealed scroll, was Thomas. He didn't look ashamed.
He looked resolved.
And as he met Mary's gaze and unrolled the scroll, he spoke just 3 words before the world around her began to spiral. She wasn't supposed. But the rest was lost in the chaos. Because at that moment someone screamed. A torch was dropped. And the camp burst into flames. The fire roared around her like a living beast, swallowing tents, scrolls, and memories in a cyclone of heat and ash. Shouts rang out as people scattered into the trees, their faces streaked with fear and confusion, but Mary stood her ground in the heart of the inferno. Smoke curled around her, biting at her lungs, but she kept her eyes locked on Thomas, still standing at the ridge, scroll unfurled, flanked by the hooded figures of the serpent and chalice. The symbol that once lived in whispers now stood bold in open daylight, and with it, the full truth of the conspiracy pressed down on her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestrated deception. Every moment of her journey had been manipulated by a force far more calculating than she ever imagined, and the man she once trusted with her secrets was the one holding the dagger. She ran toward him, dodging sparks and collapsing tents, her feet pounding the scorched earth. Flames danced in her periphery, but her focus stayed fixed on Thomas. Her heart thundered in her chest, not just from adrenaline, but from the sickening sense of clarity that came with understanding. He hadn't vanished because he was a victim. He had gone to report, to prepare. He hadn't lost faith. He had never believed. And now, the final act of their cruel game was playing out with surgical precision. Mary was meant to be exposed, publicly, irrevocably, before being erased. But something had gone wrong. She had survived. She had asked too many questions. And now, the script had changed. At the top of the ridge, Thomas raised his voice, not in apology or defense, but in command. He told the scattered crowd that Mary was a liability, that her presence had drawn the attention of dangerous enemies, and that her removal was necessary for the movement's survival. He spoke calmly, almost coldly, as if the fire and chaos below were nothing more than the cost of stability. He said the scroll in his hand contained evidence of her past, a record of her time as a broker of information, a woman once paid to pass on secrets in Magdalene. She is not who she says she is, he shouted. She never was. But Mary had heard enough. She reached the base of the ridge and pulled from her cloak the one object that had survived the fire, a water-damaged scrap of cloth, tucked deep inside her garment. It was the charcoal sketch the girl had given her, the one that identified her as a target. Only now, beneath the layers of soot and time, she could see what she'd missed before, the same serpent and chalice insignia faintly marked on the bottom corner. The drawing hadn't been sent to frighten her. It had been a warning from someone on the inside, someone who wanted her to look closer. Mary climbed the ridge as Thomas turned to her, his expression tightening. For the first time, he looked uncertain. She held the cloth up high, her voice hoarse but unwavering, and asked him to explain why the insignia was on a drawing meant to destroy her. Why a message warning of her death bore the same mark as the people now protecting him. And most importantly, why he knew that the contents of the scroll hadn't come from temple archives at all, but from her journal, the one that was burned in front of her days earlier. That stopped everything. The crowd fell silent. Even the fire, for a moment, seemed to recede. Because what she had just revealed wasn't just a question. It was a revelation. The only way Thomas could have known what was in that scroll, the names, the dates, the phrases, was if he had read her journal. The same journal he had helped her pack. The one only he had access to. He hadn't found evidence. He had planted it. Thomas's mask cracked. Just slightly. A flicker of frustration, of something primal surfacing behind his eyes. He stepped forward and hissed that she didn't understand what was at stake, that the movement couldn't survive with her drawing this much attention, this much danger. That she was a variable, a wild card, and men like him had been appointed to ensure purity of message. He called it protection. He said what he did was for the good of the cause. But Mary heard what he didn't say. It was control. It was fear. And it had nothing to do with faith. She stepped closer, now only a few feet between them. The fire had moved downwind, and the others were circling in, watching, listening, waiting. Mary spoke directly to them now, reminding them of who she was. Not with grand speeches or cries of innocence, but with quiet truth. She reminded them that she was the first one Jesus had called by name after the resurrection, that she had walked beside him not as a pawn, but as a disciple. That her story, flawed, human, and raw, was the proof that redemption was possible. And if her presence threatened those who clung to rigid control, then maybe that was the point. Just as Thomas stepped forward, raising his voice again to shut her down, another voice rang out, clear and commanding.
Peter.
He stepped between them, holding a charred fragment of Mary's journal, half-burned but legible, and declared that he had read enough. Not only had Thomas stolen and altered it, but the pages revealed that Mary had warned of a traitor long before the others knew what to look for. That the symbol had appeared in her dreams. That she had sensed the corruption. That she had tried to protect them, even when no one believed her. Thomas lunged then, not at Mary, but at Peter. But it was too late. The others restrained him, pulling back the scroll, uncovering a hidden seal beneath the parchment that bore the insignia of the temple's intelligence ring. It was forged. The story he had spun, the carefully constructed lie, unraveled in seconds. But just as Mary began to breathe again, just as it seemed the nightmare was ending, one final twist struck her cold. Among the group restraining Thomas stood Mara, her face unreadable, her eyes locked on Mary, and in her hand, unnoticed by all but Mary, was another scroll, unmarked, unopened, and in the faintest flicker of firelight, Mary saw the edge of the serpent and chalice mark etched into Mara's ring. The fires eventually died down, leaving behind the kind of silence that doesn't bring peace, but demands reflection. Ash coated the earth like snowfall, softening the jagged edges of what had been a battle not just for survival, but for truth. The camp was quiet now, reduced, scattered, fragile, but no longer blind. In the aftermath, people moved slowly, as if still waking up from a dream they didn't realize had turned into a nightmare. Thomas had been taken away under guard, stripped of the authority he'd hidden behind for so long. The forged scrolls were studied, compared, and their lies exposed. The serpent and chalice mark had lost its power in the light of open truth, but the damage it had done would take time to repair. Trust wasn't something easily mended, especially when its deepest wounds had come from those who wore the face of loyalty. Mary sat at the edge of the camp, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, staring into the dying embers of a small fire. Her eyes were tired but clear, her spirit quiet but unbroken. In her lap rested the final piece of her journal, the only surviving fragment of the life she once knew, now stained with soot and fingerprints from too many hands. It was no longer sacred, but it was still hers. What it had cost her was impossible to measure, but what it had revealed was far more important than anything she had written. The truth, even when buried under betrayal and fear, had a way of breaking through. And she had carried that truth longer than she realized. Mara had left just before dawn, saying little, her expression unreadable. Mary didn't stop her. She wasn't sure she could. She didn't know yet if Mara had acted under orders, or if she was something else entirely, an observer who changed her course, or a loyalist who slipped through the cracks. The scroll Mara had held remained unopened, left behind by the tent post with no explanation. It now rested beside Mary in the dust. And though every instinct told her to read it, to discover the final twist, she didn't.
Not yet.
Maybe not ever. Some answers didn't need to come all at once. Some needed to be earned, not by uncovering more secrets, but by learning how to live without them defining everything. Peter approached quietly, offering her a water skin, and a silent apology. He hadn't spoken much since the confrontation, his eyes weighed down with guilt and reflection. She took the water, but not the apology, because she didn't need it. What she needed was for people to stop mistaking silence for wisdom and suspicion for caution. What she needed was for them to see her, not as a symbol or a scandal or a threat, but as someone who had chosen, every day, to stay, even when she had every reason to run. In the days that followed, the followers began to rebuild, not just the camp, but the way they moved through the world. Messages were no longer passed without scrutiny, and decisions weren't made behind closed tents. Mary found herself at the center of a quiet shift. People asked her opinion, sat beside her at meals, and listened not out of obligation but respect. Not because she demanded it, but because she had lived through the fire and never stopped telling the truth, even when no one else believed it. Her past, once used as a weapon against her, had become something more powerful than shame. It had become testimony. Proof that redemption wasn't given in whispers, but earned in scars. But still, something lingered. At night, when the camp slept and the stars took their places like silent witnesses, Mary would walk to the ridge where Thomas had once stood. She'd stare into the darkness and wonder how far the serpent's reach had gone. Were there more? Had they already infiltrated new groups, whispered new lies into other ears? Had Mara's departure been a retreat or a regrouping? There was no comfort in pretending the danger was gone, no illusion that this was the end of the battle. But Mary wasn't afraid anymore, because she had learned something in the heart of the fire, that faith doesn't crumble in the face of betrayal. It becomes sharper, clearer, stronger. The final scroll remained unopened for weeks, until one morning, she sat alone by the fire, unrolled it slowly, and read its contents. But what she found wasn't what she expected. There were no names, no instructions, no accusations. Only a single line, written in a careful hand. Asterisk, not all who watch are enemies. Some are waiting for the moment they are free to believe. Asterisk. Mary folded the scroll and tucked it into her cloak. For the first time in days, she smiled, not because the mystery was solved, but because it wasn't. Because faith doesn't always need proof. Because sometimes the questions are the very thing that keep us walking forward. And as the first light of morning crept over the horizon, she stood, stepped toward the fire, and began to speak, not to defend herself, but to tell her story one more time. Because someone needed to remember.
Someone needed to know.
And maybe, just maybe, someone out there was still listening.